This is CD Part 2, How Couples Can Solve Problems. Here again is Dr. Norm Wise.
You see, sometimes we just have to admit, I might have blown. By the way, can you hurt a person and not mean to hurt a person? Sure. So just because you say, I didn't mean to hurt you, that doesn't mean you didn't hurt them. If you get into an elevator and you step on somebody's foot, and they say, ouch, and you say, why are you attacking me? And they go, I'm not attacking you, it's just, you're on my foot. You're accusing me of doing wrong. And you see, we have that problem. Sometimes the people close to us are just saying ouch, and we get upset over the fact they say ouch. It isn't that we came in and said, I'm going to step on your foot now. Okay. Sometimes we hurt people without, now sometimes we do hurt people intentionally. And then we need to confess when really we were just in a kind of mean and mad mood and we did hurt them. Of course, we hurt them because they hurt us first, which of course that's justice. Don't go down that road. That doesn't work. Finally, pray. Yes? Question? Right, it's a reality check. And what I want to do is take a step back and say, what is the reality of the situation? And what we're trying to do is say, God, how do you see the situation? Because God is the objective observer. And that's what comes to our last point, which is prayer. The interesting thing, couples go through all this, and a lot of times they never pray. Even good Christian folk. In the whole process, there's never a time when we just say, Lord, help. Lord, I don't understand what's gone wrong here. Lord, I'm confused. And somehow we can't get prayer to be practical at the time when we most need it, which is in the middle of these type of relationships, okay? So what you do, we stop, we slow down, we pause, we put it on hold, we think before we speak, we try to get objectivity, and we pray. You see, what this has done is this put us in a place where we're striving to be sane and stable and spiritual. Now, none of us are 100% sane and stable and spiritual, but we can be moving in the direction of sanity, stability, and spirituality, or we can be moving away from sanity, stability, and spirituality. And I can guarantee you, when you get into argument mode, which direction do you think you're heading in? You're moving away from sanity, okay? You're moving away from stability, and you're moving away from spirituality. So understand, the further you go down the road of argument, the further you remove yourself from the will of God. And the further you move yourself from being the best self you could be, okay? So you're moving in the wrong direction. And usually we figure that out by the end of the fight, which is why we apologize, okay? Because we start hearing what we said and we go, wow, that was bad. Well, we're going to have a planned time to talk instead. Once we stop, we say, well, listen, why don't we get together? It can be in 15 minutes, a half hour, not more than a day. Say, hey, I'd like to sit down and talk about this in a sane, stable, and spiritual way. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to put this on you. Some people have told me that men want to be the head of their homes. Is that you guys have heard that as well? You guys, I want to be the head of my home. The good news is you are the head of your home. You are an elected position by God, and there's no recounts, there's no 4-year election cycle or anything else. You have been made kind of permanently head of the home, and so you have good job security. So that's good. And no one can take it away from you, so you really don't have to worry. You simply are that, it's like, there you are. Now, since you want to be that, a leader is this. The leader, a good leader, is the one who does the right thing first. That makes sense? A good leader is the one who does the right thing first. So since you're the leader, you're going to lead in the stop mode. You're going to be the one that says, oh, I think we should take a moment and stop. And then you're going to be the leader, and you're going to say, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a planned conversation on this, and I'll meet you tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we'll sit down and we'll talk about this. And so you see, you're going to lead in the process, because that's what a good leader does, okay? And so you said, I want to be the head of the home. Fantastic! I'm glad, because now you get to do the right thing first, and that is move towards peace instead of towards war, okay? Now you see, you can be a good leader or a bad leader. And a bad leader doesn't do the right thing first. You're a leader either way, good, mediocre, or bad. But a good leader is one who does the right thing first. So that's the challenge to the men. Well, it's going to be a planned time to talk. And we are striving to be peacemakers. So the first thing that the couple has to do is you really have to define what the problem is. A lot of times there's no agreement on what the problem is. Also, another key, we only talk about one problem at a time. This keeps the thing turning into a machine gun. It's a dirty way of fighting. Basically what happens is you raise issue after issue after issue, and it just opens one emotional can after another emotional can, and you don't know what you're talking about anymore. You started off about taking the garbage out, and now you're talking about your mother. And you don't know what the garbage has to do with the mother, and you're just totally confused, okay, as how you even got there. And then people say, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. And the other person, of course, doesn't know what you're talking about either. So this is because you don't focus. Now, what you can do, the couple can make a list, and they can list every single issue or problem that they eventually want to talk about, and they set up a time once a week to have a problem-solving discussion. And so by doing that, it takes out one of the reasons we argue, we get to this feeling, we're never talking about anything, we're never getting anything done, we're never solving anything. And that anxiety inside saying, we've had the same problems all these times and nothing's, it leads people into choosing to say, I'm going to start an argument just so we talk about something important. In fact, I had one person who believed that the only time her spouse was honest with her was when he was mad. Anger is not a truth serum, just to let you know. What anger does, it puts us in the fight or flight mode. And since I can't run what the computer has been told, take all information you have about this person to maximize the harm you can cause them, and it shoots that up into the computer. And it's simply logically attacks the person with the full knowledge available with no idea of being truthful. That isn't what you told the computer. You didn't tell the computer be truthful. You told the computer, defend me. And the computer follows its orders. Defend, okay. Boom. And then after the adrenaline's gone down, after you get out of fight and flight, another part of your brain, which is kind of like the referee, comes in and says, oh my goodness, what did you say when I took a nap? How? And it starts saying, oh, and then you come back and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. You really didn't mean that. But now the person won't believe you didn't mean it because you said it when you were so emotional. But understand, anger is not a truth serum. Anger, in fact, causes us to say things we don't really believe at all, but we know it'll hurt the other person. So don't count on anger to get the truth. Doesn't work. So, excuse me. Problem defined. So you make a list of problems, and you know you're going to talk once a week about a problem. So it takes all the tension out. We're not going to avoid communication. We're going to actually seek it, but we're going to seek it in a safe environment. The second part is we want to talk about the emotions attached to the problem, and each person then will be able to say, this is how I feel about the problem. Any emotion not expressed gets in the way of clear communication. Any emotion not expressed gets in the way of clear communication. So we have to let the emotions have their moment, but we don't have to let the emotions guide our words. So we get the emotions out, but we express them in a healthy way. And once, by the way, the emotions get heard, if I say to my spouse, I'm really frustrated, and my spouse says to me, I can tell you're really feeling under pressure here and really frustrated and you're really doing, the moment I hear that they heard my emotion gets quieter. Oh, they heard what I felt. Now I don't have to be so loud. I don't have to be so wild. I don't have to be trying to push so hard because I was heard. Any emotion that heard gets real calm. The emotions that don't get heard get crazy. Okay? So we're going to get those emotions heard so that they don't drive us to crazy. Okay? Then we're going to kick in the logical side of the brain and we're going to analyze the possible answers to the problem. Because you see, the focus of this, we're not trying to get justice. We're not trying to punish each other. We're not trying to force anybody to do anything. We're trying to actually just find an answer. We as a couple, face a problem and we want to find an answer. We want to make our life better. We want to improve things. And so we'll work together as a team towards finding an answer. And so the whole purpose is focus on the problem. I even tell people, use this couple here, I will tell them to sit side by side during the conversation, not face to face. See, one of the problems is when you look at each other, you have this thing called body language. Any of you ever know about that? And your spouse subconsciously has all kinds of little things. They wrinkle their forehead. And the moment you see them wrinkle their forehead, you go, you are insulting me. They go, what? You know what? Your forehead. Oh no. Well, it takes a lot of self-control to get to a point where you don't wrinkle your forehead, because you're not even aware you're wrinkling your forehead. And your spouse has the advantage. They can see you don't have a mirror in front of you. That would be weird. Have a mirror over here. Say, oh, I wrinkled my forehead. Oh, sorry about that. Yes. Yeah, rolling your eyes. Yes, rolling your eyes is also, and so it's very hard. Oh, I rolled my eye, sorry, So it's very hard. So you don't do that. You sit here and then you find something. Doesn't matter what it is. And say, that is the problem. We are facing the problem together. We are not having a conflict with each other. We're trying together to solve the problem. And the problem is not your spouse. And that's we're going to redefine how we define the problem. So you see, if you do this, now you're a team working for a joint solution. That changes everything. After you analyze it, you're going to contemplate prayerfully and carefully and together seek the best solution you know. It doesn't mean, by the way, that it will be the best solution. It'll be the best solution you both can agree to. But that's okay. God cares more about the process than he really does about the answer most of the time. In other words, there's a lot of different answers to a lot of different problems that are moral. The only time an answer would be something that would be wrong is it's morally wrong. But outside of that, there's all kinds of different ways to solve problems. There's 10,000 ways that are moral to solve the problem you're facing. And some would argue, well, these are more efficient. But the most efficient answer is the one that's most effective in making the relationship stronger. The answer that builds trust, the answer that builds love, the answer, you see, that builds respect, that's the best answer. Because you see, the quality is not just efficiency. Well, it's effectiveness in relationships. So different couples will solve problems radically different. My wife and I, we got married and we found that we had a habit. Now I know none of you have ever had this problem, but Terry is very nervous about other people driving. Now, she is nervous regardless of who it is. It could be her father. And when her father was driving, she was very nervous. And she would give him advice on how to drive. You can imagine how that went, okay? Not well. If her mother drove, it made her nervous. And she would give advice to her mother. That went a little better just because mom is a little bit more like, oh well. But, nevertheless, it was difficult. Now, when we were dating and I drove, she never complained because we were dating. And I didn't know that there was a special category called don't say anything negative about the person driving while dating because it's a turnoff, okay? And so I said, wow, I finally found somebody on this planet that thinks I'm a good driver. I mean, I was feeling really good about myself. I mean, I was having warm fuzzies about this whole thing. I said, this is really great, But then we got married. And that put me into the realm of family, which meant I was just like her dad, which now meant that she was freely giving me advice. And then I got into, do you know the day you drove worse? It was the day you had to get your license with the police officer there, right? Everything was on the line. And so you made every mistake that you've ever made. Well, now she was like the police officer. I had a job. I had to drive. I had to go all across the county and to appointments and stuff like that. And I did that without any accidents. Get Terry in the car and I was frozen, okay? And we began to have some pretty intense arguments when I drove. Her perspective was, if you drove right, you would drive like me. And you're not driving like me. Not only that, but I can't tell what's going on in your mind. So you better hit the brake. Yeah, I was about doing that, okay? It's hard. So we went through this, and we tried different processes. She tried, to work, but we talked it through, and I said, listen, I don't like to drive. I really don't. If I had enough money, I'd have a chauffeur. I like to even double task, while we're traveling, and stuff like that. So the thing is, I tell you what, from now on, because we had kids, I said, we're going to emotionally damage our children by just driving them around. I said, listen, what we're going to do, you will drive from this point forward. And we did that mutually because we loved each other and there was no reason. We couldn't break the cycle, but we came up with a solution. And we have done that to this day. And we have avoided 40 years of arguments and a whole lot of emotional pain. And I've gotten a whole lot of work done, especially now that they have computers that you can go on long trips and you can do all kinds of stuff and double tasks. This has been great. I've been happy. She's been happy. And the only time we haven't been happy is we'll try to tell ourselves this is not true. And so, we'll say, here. And then nothing's changed. We're fundamentally, but you see, the solution worked for us. You can say that won't work for us. You're not Norman Terry. It doesn't have to work for you. It just has to work for the couple, you see? So literally, there's 1,000 ways you could solve that problem, all moral, but the important thing is you look to find the solution that works for you. And the focus is not to figure out who's right or who's wrong, just how do we solve the problem? I didn't want to be saying horrible things to my wife. I didn't want to be mean to her. I had to find a way to keep from doing that. And we did. And it's worked really well. You don't have to like it. You find your own answer. You're going to contemplate prayerfully and carefully. We have frustration in conversations where I feel I have given an adequate answer and you feel I haven't. And so somewhere in our dynamic of communication, we're going to have to alter that. In other words, the key is you just look at it as a problem. You don't try to deny the problem. You try to say what change has to take place. So by the way, every problem does mean this. You're going to have to change. Because if it was working, there wouldn't be a problem. Okay? So you stop trying to just say, and the answer everyone has, the first answer is, well, yeah, there needs to be a change. The other person has to change. Simple. But no, we have to find a win-win solution. Finally, you're going to experiment with the solution. You're going to look for a way to practically take whatever it is that you have come to as a couple and put it into practicality. Put it into your lifestyle. So we're going to look at each of these. Very important. We must see the problem to solve it. G.K. Chesterton said it isn't that they don't see the solution, it is that they can't see the problem. And this is mine. You cannot solve a problem you will not admit you have. So the only problem you guys can solve is one that you admit you have. Now, the reason to define the problem is hard because the objective that you're approaching to is we have a problem. We together have a problem, and we together are looking for a solution. The subjective thing that we're usually saying, you have a problem. The focus is only on my spouse has a problem. And so this is not a shared problem. The problem is you. Now, for some reason, that usually causes people to be defensive. Can you imagine that? Now, I'll tell you what is a good subjective process. It is when I look in the mirror and I say, I have a problem. So there's two problem-solving things that need to be happening in a good marriage. I need to be looking in the mirror and asking myself each day, how is Norm doing? How am I doing as a husband? How am I doing as a father? How am I doing as a Christian? How am I doing? Because you see, the only person on this planet that I have control over is Norm. I have no control over my spouse. I have no control over what they say. I have no control over what they do. I have no control over their attitudes. In fact, any time that I try to have control over them, I'm going to hurt them because the only way I can try to control them is to cause them pain, to get them to do something different. And it doesn't work, by the way. Not in the long run. So a good subjective thing is, what problems do I have as a husband? And anything I can come to my spouse and say, you know, I've been thinking about it, and I'm just not spending enough time with you. You know, I have really been looking at my schedule, and I see that I haven't been spending enough time, and I want us to figure out, and I want your help in thinking about how can we spend more time together. Well, you see, now we've gone to a we issue, but it started with an I issue. What I encourage couples to do, make a list of all the things that you need to change in the relationship to improve it. Now, you already had the list of all the things your spouse needed to improve. But that's a waste of time because they're not going to listen to you anyway. Because it's going to be too hard. They're going to get too defensive. And so most of the time when we list the faults of our spouse, they don't usually hear that. In other words, that sets off all their defense mechanisms and they shut that down. So there is this part here. Now, that's why when the couple is forming the problem, we want to form the problem, such as what we had here. We are having a problem communicating. We have a pattern where it seems to me that you are frustrated when I don't give what you consider to be adequate information, and I feel I have given enough. And we keep getting into that same pattern of argument, and we need to find a way to change that pattern of communication so that we don't have to waste our time arguing anymore. Well, you see, that's a we issue now. You see, because it's not saying that any person's the bad person. Nobody's wrong. We just have a problem. That makes sense? So you see, this is one of the things you have to learn. You have to learn on how to define the problem without attacking the person. You're not trying to attack the person. You're trying to solve a problem. So you have to define the problem in a way as neutral as possible so as to not attack the spouse. Does that make sense? Is that making sense? Okay. So, some of the things you'll be thinking about, what caused you to think there was a problem. Every time I drive, I start saying nasty things to my wife, dead giveaway. What is confusing or complicated about this issue? I don't know, how to drive in a way where this works, and she doesn't know a way not to be trying to hit the brakes over on the passenger side, and so it's an automatic reaction. How would I describe this to a friend? Okay, sometimes when we're talking to a friend, it gets a little bit more objective, and so we look for their advice, saying this is what you're doing. How critical is it? How important is it that we would solve the problem? That gets us a little bit of energy to work on it. Is there a problem behind the problem? In other words, there could be a deeper, sometimes the first problem is just really a sign of a deeper problem. And that's something that sometimes has to be addressed. And what would the opposite of having the problem look like? In other words, if this was really just smooth, what would I imagine in my mind what it would be like if the problem was solved. And so I imagine in my mind. Now, when I imagine in my mind the solution, I also sometimes start seeing the solution. But I ask myself, what would it look like if we had solved this problem? What if this problem, it's like this. If you solved this problem and you woke up tomorrow and this problem was no longer here, what would be different in your life? How's that for a question? See, by the way, one of the most powerful things you have is the God-given imagination in your mind. And a lot of times we lose our imagination, our creativity, because we get into attacking each other. And it's out of our creativity that we'll find answers. It's out of our imagination that we'll look at new ways to look at it. Most of us, by the way, will have to use some of these skills in our professional lives. If you just come in and argue with your boss every day, how does that go for your career? Usually not too well, right? What if you related to your boss the way you related to your spouse? Would that be a good work relationship? See, most of us know I can't get away with that there, right? There's going to be immediate consequences. If I go in and call my boss stupid, that usually doesn't go over very well, okay? So what it is we engage actually some better parts of our brain because we recognize there could be consequences. The problem is there's consequences at home. They're just not immediately financial. Okay? And so they don't come across as real, but they're just as real. And so we need to put ourselves into that frame of mind, which is trying to be creative, problem-solving, solution-oriented, rather than blaming. Now, by the same way, we many times will waste a lot of energy at work looking for the fellowship of the discontented around the water cooler and looking for other people who also are upset. But that usually, by the way, doesn't help your career. Okay, that isn't usually the steps towards success. But it's easy to fall into it even in a work environment. Yes? Right, yeah, that is also true. It creates all kinds of potential problems. Well, an example.
This concludes CD number 2. Please change over to CD number 3.